Slow your breathing and let the present moment soften. The noise of the day does not need to follow you here. Tonight, time moves differently. It stretches, quiet and patient, inviting you to step away from urgency and into memory. Before names were fixed and dates were counted, stone already stood beneath the sun. Long before certainty, before records and dynasties, human imagination looked at the land and asked where meaning begins. Imagine warm sand cooling after dusk, wind moving gently across a vast plateau, and a silhouette rising where earth meets sky. Not a monument to be solved, but a presence to be felt. If sleep arrives, let it take you. If awareness lingers, let it wander. Either way, the journey begins beneath the weight of ancient stone. Long before the pyramids became symbols of Egypt, they were simply there. Not as tourist icons, not as puzzles to be solved, but as silent forms rising from a landscape already old when the first names were spoken aloud. To stand before them, even in imagination, is to feel time compress. The past does not feel distant. It feels layered, heavy, and strangely present. If you feel drawn to journeys like this, where history slows and memory deepens, you are gently welcome to subscribe, not as an obligation, but as a quiet way to return to these long conversations with the ancient world. The pyramids do not announce themselves as inventions. They do not explain their purpose. They endure. Their shape is simple, yet absolute. 4 sides, 1 peak, aligned with care and intention. For thousands of years, people have stood before them asking the same question, not out of skepticism, but out of awe. What kind of world gives rise to stone that refuses to be forgotten? In ancient imagination, monuments were not merely built, they were placed, set into the world as anchors between realms. The land around the pyramids was already sacred long before dynasties carved their names into stone. The plateau was chosen, not discovered. Its stillness mattered. Its horizon mattered. Its relationship to the sky mattered. The earliest Egyptians did not see themselves as inventors standing at the beginning of time. They believed they inherited something older. Order did not start with them. It descended into their care. The pyramids, in this view, were not bold experiments of a new civilization, but continuations of a memory already present in the land. This is why the question of who built the pyramids has never truly been about labor alone. Stones can be cut, ramps can be imagined, workforces can be counted. Yet none of this explains why such effort was directed toward forms that speak less of utility and more of permanence. The pyramids do not house life. They mark it. They do not celebrate power. They preserve alignment. In the ancient mind, alignment was everything. To align with the sky was to align with order itself. Stars were not distant objects. They were eternal patterns, unchanging while kingdoms rose and fell. To build in their image was to participate in something that outlived human breath. The pyramids rise where desert meets river, where chaos meets fertility, where stillness meets motion. This boundary mattered deeply to early cultures. It was the place where worlds touched. Life emerged from water, memory rested in stone, the pyramids stood between them, unmoving. Later generations would attach names, dynasties, and dates. Pharaohs would claim ownership, carving identity into a structure that already belonged to time itself. History would begin to speak loudly around something that had never needed a voice. But beneath those layers, a quieter truth remained. The pyramids did not begin as symbols of a single culture. They became symbols because they already embodied something universal: continuity, memory, the human desire to place meaning beyond decay. To understand the pyramids is not to strip them down to methods alone. It is to listen to what they were meant to hold. And to do that, we must step further back, beyond Egypt as history remembers it, toward a time when civilization itself was still trying to remember why it began. The idea that Egypt began with certainty is a modern one. In the ancient world, beginnings were rarely sharp. They were layered, inherited, and remembered imperfectly. The earliest Egyptians spoke of a time before kings, before dynasties, when the land itself was already ordered. This was not myth in the sense of fantasy. It was memory shaped by reverence. In their stories, the world did not emerge suddenly. It unfolded. Order rose out of chaos, slowly, guided by principles older than any ruler. The Nile did not simply flow, it renewed. The sun did not merely rise, it maintained balance. Everything meaningful existed because it returned again and again in rhythm. The pyramids were born from this way of seeing. They were not conceived as buildings in the modern sense, but as statements made in stone. Statements about stability in a world defined by cycles. Statements about permanence in a landscape where floods erased and rebuilt life each year. To the ancient mind, stone was memory made solid. Wood decayed. Brick crumbled. But stone endured. To shape stone into precise form was to resist forgetting itself. The pyramid, with its unchanging geometry, became a kind of frozen time, holding a moment of alignment against the flow of centuries. This is why early Egyptian texts do not speak of innovation with pride. They speak of restoration. Kings did not boast of creating order. They claimed to uphold it. They did not invent harmony. They maintained it. Even the gods in Egyptian thought were not creators from nothing. They were arrangers, stabilizers, keepers of balance. The plateau where the pyramids rise was chosen with care that went beyond convenience. It lay above the reach of the Nile's floods, removed from the chaos of renewal, placed in stillness. From there, the pyramids could face the horizon, oriented toward the movements of the sky that never failed. In this orientation, the stars mattered more than the sun. The sun moved, changed, rose and set. The stars endured. They circled endlessly, returning to the same positions with patient certainty. To align a monument with the stars was to tie it to eternity rather than to a single life. The ancient Egyptians called these stars the imperishable ones. They believed the soul of the king did not vanish at death. It ascended, joining these fixed patterns in the sky. The pyramid was not a tomb in the modern sense. It was a passage, a bridge between earth and a realm where decay did not apply. Seen this way, the question shifts. It becomes less about how the pyramids were built and more about why such effort was devoted to structures that served no daily function. The answer lies in the ancient fear of forgetting. Without memory, order collapses. Without markers of continuity, the world returns to chaos. The pyramid stood as reassurance, a reminder that something could endure beyond floods, beyond dynasties, beyond names. It did not need to speak. Its presence was enough. Yet even this understanding did not originate fully in Egypt. The earliest dynasties spoke of a time when gods walked the land, when order was first established, and when humanity inherited the task of preserving it. These stories did not place Egypt at the center of creation, but within a longer chain of remembrance. This suggests something subtle and often overlooked. The pyramids may represent not the beginning of Egyptian civilization, but its decision to anchor itself to something it believed was already ancient. A decision to bind identity, memory, and meaning to stone, knowing that stone would outlast them all. To follow this thread further, we must step again beyond recorded history, into the realm where myth and memory overlap, where civilizations did not yet see themselves as starting points, but as caretakers of a world already shaped. Beyond the dynasties recorded on stone and papyrus, Egyptian memory reached further back into a time it described not as primitive, but as complete. A time when order was already established, when the principles governing sky, land, and life were fully known. This era was not remembered through dates. It was remembered through balance. The Egyptians spoke of the first time, a distant age when the world was set into alignment. In this age, the separation between gods and humans was not yet fixed. Knowledge flowed more freely. Order did not need to be enforced, because it was understood. Humanity did not invent harmony. It lived within it. This memory shaped how later generations understood their role. Civilization was not seen as progress away from chaos, but as an attempt to preserve something already achieved. The task of the king was not to conquer the unknown, but to prevent forgetting. His authority rested in his ability to mirror the order of the cosmos on Earth. The pyramids fit naturally into this worldview. They were not expressions of ambition, but acts of remembrance. Their form did not evolve rapidly. It emerged already refined, already precise. Early pyramid experiments show variation, but the core idea appears complete almost immediately, as if drawn from an inherited template rather than developed through trial and error. This has long unsettled modern observers. We expect complexity to arise slowly. We look for gradual improvement. Yet the pyramids seem to appear with a confidence that suggests familiarity. Their builders were not discovering principles for the first time. They were applying them. This does not require lost technology or forgotten machines. It requires something quieter, cultural memory, the passing down of principles rather than methods, knowledge that does not announce itself as innovation, but survives as tradition. In ancient societies, knowledge was not abstract. It was embodied. It lived in ritual, in orientation, in repeated practice. A builder did not need equations if proportion was already embedded in how space was understood. Alignment was not calculated. It was felt, reinforced by observation repeated across generations. The land itself was a teacher. The horizon showed where the sun rose and set. The stars traced patterns that returned with certainty. The Nile marked time through flood and retreat. To live within these rhythms was to learn geometry without naming it, astronomy without separating it from meaning. The pyramid became the crystallization of this learning. Its shape reflects the slope of sunlight, the stability of mountains, the aspiration toward the imperishable stars. It does not imitate nature. It abstracts it, reducing complexity to form. In this abstraction, the pyramid becomes timeless. It belongs equally to the past and to no specific moment. This is why it resists being explained as a single historical achievement. It feels out of time because it was meant to. Later dynasties inherited these forms and wrapped them in names, titles, and ceremonies. Pharaohs claimed descent from gods. Tombs were filled with goods, rituals multiplied, yet the core structure remained unchanged, indifferent to decoration. This suggests that the pyramids were never meant to tell stories about individuals. They were meant to stand outside biography, to mark a relationship between humanity and something larger, something enduring. As we continue this journey, the question will shift again, not toward who physically built the pyramids, but toward what kind of memory they were meant to hold, and why stone, of all materials, was chosen to carry it across time. Stone was chosen not because it was easy, but because it remembered. In a world where floodwaters rewrote the land each year, permanence was rare. Mud brick dissolved, wood decayed. Even memory faded as generations passed. Stone resisted all of this. It carried weight not only in mass, but in meaning. To the ancient Egyptian mind, materials were not neutral. Each substance carried a character, a relationship to time. Stone belonged to the eternal. It did not grow, rot, or renew. It endured unchanged, much like the stars that never seemed to age. To build in stone was to speak the language of the imperishable. This is why the pyramids were not constructed in living spaces. They were placed deliberately beyond the realm of daily life. Cities thrived near the Nile, embracing renewal and decay. The pyramids rose apart from this cycle, on the edge of the desert, where nothing grew and nothing returned. They occupied a threshold between life and timelessness. The desert itself was not seen as empty. It was seen as stable, unchanging, silent. It offered the perfect ground for memory that was not meant to be disturbed. In this stillness, stone could do what no written record could. It could wait. The pyramid's shape reinforces this intention. It widens at the base, grounding itself in the earth, and narrows toward the sky, pointing beyond the human horizon. Its geometry is simple, but its symbolism is dense. Stability below, aspiration above. Permanence through balance. This form does not celebrate complexity. It resists it. The pyramid strips away excess, leaving only what endures. In doing so, it becomes difficult to place within linear narratives of progress. It does not evolve. It appears complete. Modern discussions often focus on logistics. How many stones? How many workers? How long it took? These questions are not wrong, but they are incomplete. They address process without purpose. They treat the pyramid as a problem to be solved rather than a statement to be understood. To the builders, the effort itself was part of the meaning. Labor was not wasted if it served continuity. Time spent shaping stone was time invested in memory. The pyramid was not rushed. It was allowed to take as long as it needed because it was meant to outlast those who built it. This attitude toward time is difficult to grasp today. We measure value through efficiency. The ancient world measured it through endurance. A structure that required decades of coordinated effort was not seen as excessive. It was seen as appropriate. The pyramids did not belong to the living in the same way homes and temples did. They belonged to the afterlife, not as a distant realm, but as a continuation of order. Death was not an ending. It was a transition into a different state of balance. This belief shaped every aspect of pyramid construction: orientation, proportion, placement. None of it was arbitrary. Each choice reinforced the idea that life, order, and memory extended beyond the visible. As we move forward, the focus will turn toward alignment, not only of stones, but of ideas, toward how the pyramids mirror the sky, and how that mirror reveals what the ancient Egyptians believed was truly eternal. Alignment was not an abstract idea to the ancient Egyptians. It was a living principle, observed daily in the movement of the sky and reinforced through ritual and repetition. To align something was to place it correctly within the order that already existed. Misalignment was not error alone. It was imbalance, a quiet drift toward chaos. The pyramids were conceived as instruments of alignment. Their faces were oriented with extraordinary care toward the cardinal directions, not as a display of technical mastery, but as an act of participation. North, south, east, and west were not merely directions. They were axes of meaning, dividing the world into intelligible space. The north held special importance. It was the region of the circumpolar stars, those that never set, endlessly circling the same point in the sky. These stars did not rise and fall like the sun. They endured. To align a pyramid toward this eternal rotation was to orient it toward permanence itself. This was not symbolism layered onto architecture after the fact. It was architecture born from symbolism. The pyramid did not point randomly upward. It pointed with intention, echoing the invisible structures that governed time and space. In this worldview, the sky was not distant. It was intimately connected to life on Earth. What happened above was reflected below. Order in the heavens ensured order in the land. When the stars kept their rhythm, the Nile would return, crops would grow, society would hold. The pyramid became a fixed reference point within this relationship. It did not move. It did not change. It offered a stable anchor against which the turning of the sky could be measured. In doing so, it transformed observation into permanence. This is why the pyramids appear less decorative than later temples. They do not tell stories through reliefs or inscriptions. They do not narrate events. They simply exist in precise relation to the cosmos. Their silence is deliberate. Meaning was not meant to be read. It was meant to be felt. Later structures would become more elaborate. Walls would fill with images. Names would be carved deeply into stone. Yet the pyramid resisted this impulse. Its power lay in restraint. It said more by saying less. To modernize, this restraint can feel cold, impersonal, but to the ancient mind, it was comforting. It suggested that something in the world was stable enough to remain untouched by the passing concerns of human life. The alignment of the pyramids also reveals a deeper confidence, a belief that the cosmos itself was trustworthy, that its patterns were reliable enough to build upon, that the future would resemble the past closely enough for stone to remain meaningful across generations. This trust did not come from blind faith. It came from long observation, from watching the sky return night after night, from seeing seasons repeat, from experiencing the resilience of order even after disruption. The pyramid captured this trust in physical form. It was an agreement made in stone between humanity and the universe, a declaration that order was not temporary and that memory deserved a place beyond the fragility of human life. As we continue, this agreement will lead us toward the question of guardianship. Who was responsible for maintaining this order? Who stood between the human world and the vast patterns of the sky? And how did this responsibility shape the figures of gods, kings, and divine ancestors remembered in Egyptian tradition? The pyramids do not answer these questions directly. They prepare the ground for them. They establish a silent certainty from which the rest of the story unfolds. Guardianship of order was never imagined as a solitary role. In ancient Egyptian thought, balance existed only when responsibility was shared across realms. The sky held its pattern. The land received them. Humanity maintained them. Between these layers stood figures whose purpose was not domination, but mediation. The gods were not distant creators who stepped away after shaping the world. They were active principles embodied in form. Each represented a force that needed constant attention: the sun's journey, the flooding river, the stillness of the earth. Order was not automatic. It had to be upheld. At the center of this system stood the king, not as an inventor of law, but as its caretaker. His authority did not originate in strength alone. It came from alignment. A king ruled only so long as he upheld the balance that preceded him. When balance failed, legitimacy dissolved quietly, often long before power visibly collapsed. This belief shaped how the pyramids were understood. They were not private monuments. They were public anchors. The king's tomb was not a personal memorial. It was a statement that order would continue beyond his life. His death did not end responsibility. It transferred it. In this sense, the pyramid belonged as much to the living as to the dead. It reassured society that continuity had not been broken, that the agreement between sky and land remained intact, that the cycles would continue. This is why the construction of a pyramid was a national effort, not merely in labor, but in meaning. To participate in its building was to participate in order itself. Each stone placed correctly reinforced the belief that the world remained intelligible. The gods associated with the afterlife were not judges in the modern sense. They did not weigh souls to reward or punish morality. They measured balance. They assessed whether life had remained aligned with order. The concern was not guilt, but harmony. Within this framework, death lost much of its fear. It became a transition between states of responsibility. The deceased king did not disappear. He joined the imperishable order he had upheld in life. The pyramid marked this passage, standing as a witness. Yet even as kingship was elevated, it was constrained. The king was powerful, but not autonomous. He was bound by the same order he served. The pyramids, for all their scale, do not glorify individual identity. They suppress it. Names are minimal. Imagery is restrained. The form itself dominates. This restraint reveals something essential. The pyramid was never about ego. It was about continuity. about ensuring that no single life disrupted the balance of many. As dynasties changed and time moved forward, later rulers would reinterpret these meanings. Titles would grow grander, rituals would become more elaborate, but the core idea remained unchanged beneath the surface. Order existed before any king. It would exist after him. The pyramids stood to make this truth visible. As we continue, the story will widen again, beyond Egypt's borders, beyond a single culture, toward the shared human impulse to anchor memory in stone, to build against forgetting, and to leave behind something that speaks when names no longer do. The pyramids were not alone in this impulse. They were part of a wider ancient understanding that permanence was rare, precious, and worth the cost. Across the ancient world, this impulse toward permanence appeared again and again. Different cultures, separated by distance and language, arrived at similar conclusions. Memory needed weight. It needed form. It needed to be placed somewhere the future could not easily erase. Stone became the chosen medium not because it was universal, but because it endured where everything else failed. From Mesopotamia to the Nile, from high plateaus to river valleys, early civilizations raised structures that did not serve daily life. They served continuity. Ziggurats rose in stepped layers. Stone circles marked the land. Megaliths were set upright with care that far exceeded their practical value. These were not experiments in architecture. They were statements about time. The pyramids stand among the most refined of these statements, but they do not stand alone in intent. They belong to a shared ancient intuition that the world required anchors, points of reference that could outlast the fragility of memory passed only through speech. This intuition did not arise from abstract philosophy. It arose from loss. Floods erased villages, fires consumed records, empires fell, generations disappeared without leaving trace. Against this backdrop, the desire to place something beyond the reach of ordinary decay became urgent. Stone offered resistance. It did not forgive neglect easily. Once shaped, it demanded respect. It could not be rewritten casually. In this way, stone structures imposed continuity not only physically, but culturally. They forced societies to remember what they had committed to endure. The pyramid took this commitment further than most. Its scale alone declared intent. This was not a marker meant to be visited occasionally. It dominated the horizon. It imposed itself on the landscape. It refused to be ignored. Yet, despite this dominance, it communicated without instruction. There were no proclamations carved across its surface, no detailed explanations. The meaning was embedded in form itself. Shape replaced language. Orientation replaced narrative. This suggests a deep confidence in shared understanding. The builders believed that future generations would not need explanation, that the pyramid's presence would be enough to provoke the right questions, even if the answers change. In this sense, the pyramid is less a message and more a conversation, one that unfolds slowly across centuries. Each generation approaches it with new assumptions, new knowledge, new doubts. The structure does not respond. It waits. This waiting is intentional. The pyramid does not argue for a single interpretation. It allows meaning to evolve without collapsing. It remains stable while understanding shifts around it. This balance between permanence and openness is rare. Most monuments demand agreement. They insist on a story. The pyramid resists this. It offers alignment, not instruction. It invites contemplation rather than obedience. This quality may explain why the pyramids continue to unsettle modern observers. We expect artifacts to explain themselves. We expect purpose to be clear. When it is not, suspicion arises. We look for missing explanations, hidden knowledge, lost builders. But this discomfort says more about modern expectations than ancient intentions. The pyramids were never meant to satisfy curiosity. They were meant to survive it. As we move deeper into this exploration, we will begin to touch the tension between ancient silence and modern interpretation, between a world that trusted memory to endure without explanation and a world that demands answers immediately. The pyramids stand between these worlds, unmoved by either. They do not reveal secrets. They reveal endurance. And in doing so, they quietly challenge how we understand history, progress, and the meaning of what we choose to leave behind. Modern interpretation struggles with silence. Where ancient builders trusted form to speak across time, we search for explanations that fit within our frameworks. We catalog, we measure, we simulate. And when answers remain incomplete, imagination rushes in to fill the gap. This is where the pyramids begin to fracture into theories. Advanced tools, lost civilizations, external intervention. These ideas arise not from the stones themselves, but from our discomfort with ambiguity. We expect intention to be documented. We expect progress to look incremental. When neither appears, we assume something is missing. Yet the ancient world was comfortable with what remained unspoken. Knowledge was not always meant to be recorded explicitly. Some understanding was preserved through practice rather than description, through repetition rather than instruction, through alignment rather than explanation. The pyramids reflect this mindset. Their builders did not leave behind manuals because the monument itself was the manual. Its orientation taught the sky. Its proportions taught balance. Its placement taught relationship between land, river, and horizon. To those living within that culture, much did not need to be explained. The sky was observed nightly. The Nile was experienced annually. The desert was known intimately. Geometry was not an abstract discipline. It was embedded in daily life. When modern observers isolate the pyramids from this lived context, they appear anomalous. When returned to it, they become coherent expressions of a worldview that valued continuity over novelty. This does not mean that every question has an answer waiting to be uncovered. Some questions were never meant to be resolved. The pyramids were not puzzles constructed for future curiosity. They were commitments made to endurance. Understanding this requires a shift in perspective, away from seeing ancient monuments as problems to solve, and toward seeing them as decisions made within a different relationship to time. The ancient Egyptians did not build to impress the future. They built to stabilize the present. They could not know how long their structures would last. They only knew they were placing something into a world defined by cycles and loss. That something was not information, it was orientation. As we move forward, the story will turn inward again, toward how modern fascination with the pyramids reveals our own anxieties about origins, progress, and forgetting, toward the realization that the questions we ask of ancient stone often reflect what we fear has been lost in ourselves. The pyramids endure not because they hide answers, but because they refuse to rush us toward them. They remain still, while our interpretations change, reminding us that endurance itself may be the message we struggle most to hear. The fascination we bring to the pyramids today is not only about the past, it is about the present moment in which we stand before them, carrying questions shaped by speed, uncertainty, and a deep discomfort with not knowing where things truly began. Ancient stone becomes a mirror. We look at it and see our own anxiety reflected back at us. Modern culture is restless. It values explanation over patience, efficiency over endurance, novelty over continuity. When confronted with monuments that do not explain themselves, that do not evolve, that do not hurry, we feel a kind of tension. The pyramids do not match our expectations of progress. They seem to appear fully formed, then remain unchanged. This unsettles us. In response, we search for extraordinary causes. We imagine missing technologies or forgotten masters because we struggle to accept that a culture so distant could possess a depth of understanding different from our own. We assume sophistication must look like ours to be valid. But the ancient world did not measure sophistication the same way. It did not seek constant improvement. It sought stability. The highest achievement was not to surpass what came before, but to maintain what had already been set into balance. This difference in values is subtle, but profound. When we project modern expectations backward, we distort what we see. The pyramids become anomalies instead of expressions, mysteries instead of commitments, problems instead of answers. The Egyptians did not ask whether their monuments would impress future generations. They asked whether they would hold, whether they would remain aligned, whether they would endure long enough to continue serving their role within the cosmic order. That role did not change when dynasties ended. It did not change when languages faded. It did not change when belief systems transformed. The pyramid remained, indifferent to interpretation, because its purpose was never dependent on belief alone. This endurance invites reflection. Why does permanence matter to us now, in an age where almost everything is temporary? Why do we feel drawn to stone that refuses to change, while living in systems that reward constant motion? Perhaps the pyramids speak to a buried longing, a desire for anchors in a world that feels increasingly unmoored, a quiet recognition that something essential is lost when continuity dissolves entirely into innovation. The ancient builders did not fear stillness. They embraced it. They believed that some things should not change, not because change is dangerous, but because continuity provides orientation. Without it, motion becomes directionless. This is why the pyramids continue to command attention even when their original meanings are debated. They offer a counterpoint to modern restlessness. They stand as proof that not all value lies in advancement. Some lies in preservation. As we move further into this journey, we will begin to explore how the pyramids exist not only as monuments of Egypt, but as symbols within a much larger human story. A story about memory, forgetting, and the fragile balance between holding on and moving forward. The pyramids do not demand that we believe in ancient gods or forgotten ages. They ask something quieter. They ask us to consider what we choose to make permanent and what we allow to fade. In their silence, they pose a question that has no single answer. Not who built them, but what kind of world believed that stone should carry meaning longer than words. And as that question lingers, the story continues, moving deeper into the shared human impulse to remember, to endure, and to place something lasting into a world that rarely pauses long enough to notice. The impulse to remember is as old as humanity itself. Long before writing, before records, before names fixed themselves in time, humans marked the land. They stacked stones, carved symbols, aligned paths with the sky. These acts were not attempts to dominate nature. They were attempts to belong within it. The pyramids represent one of the most complete expressions of this impulse. They do not stand as isolated achievements of a single culture, but as part of a broader human response to impermanence. Across continents and ages, people return to the same question. How can something meaningful be carried forward when everything living fades? In Egypt, the answer was geometry, not as mathematics in the modern sense, but as relationship. Proportion was not calculation, it was harmony, a way of ensuring that what was built resonated with what already existed. The pyramids' angles were chosen not to impress, but to endure. They echoed the slope of sunlight, the form of mountains, the stability of the horizon. This resonance mattered deeply. A structure that aligned with the natural order was believed to receive its strength. It would not stand alone against time. It would stand with it. This belief removed the urgency to explain or defend the monument. Its correctness would be proven by survival. The pyramids have survived not because they were perfect, but because they were patient. They accepted erosion. They accepted loss. Their surfaces changed. Their cores remained. This distinction mirrors the ancient understanding of memory itself. Details fade. Structure endures. In this way, the pyramids teach without instruction. They demonstrate how meaning can persist even when context disappears. Names have been lost, rituals forgotten, languages transformed, yet the form still speaks. This is why attempts to reduce the pyramids to singular explanations often feel unsatisfying. No single function accounts for their presence. Tomb, temple, marker, symbol. Each interpretation touches part of the truth without holding it entirely. The ancient builders likely did not see these meanings as separate. Life, death, sky, land, and order were not divided into categories. They formed a single, continuous reality. The pyramid existed within all of it at once. To modern thought, this unity can feel elusive. We prefer distinctions. We seek primary purposes. But the ancient world operated through overlap. A structure could serve multiple roles without conflict. Meaning was layered, not exclusive. This layered meaning explains why the pyramids resist final interpretation. They were never designed to be reduced. They were designed to hold complexity without explanation, to stand as a quiet assurance that order could be preserved even when understanding shifted. As we continue, the story will move closer to the boundary between myth and material, toward how later generations reinterpreted the pyramids through their own beliefs. How gods, kings, and cosmic stories gathered around stone that had already been standing long before they arrived. The pyramids did not generate myth because they demanded it. Myth gathered around them because humans needed language for what stone alone could not say. As generations passed, the pyramids began to attract stories the way still water attracts reflection. Each era approached them carrying its own beliefs, its own uncertainties, its own need to explain what had already endured longer than memory itself. Myth did not replace stone. It gathered around it. For the Egyptians, this gathering was natural. Myth was not separate from reality. It was the language used to describe forces that could not be reduced to daily experience. Gods were not imagined as distant beings removed from the world. They were expressions of principles already at work within it. The pyramids became associated with these principles not because they depicted gods, but because they embodied stability. They stood where order was expected to hold. Over time, divine narratives settled into their shadow, giving shape to ideas that stone alone could not articulate. The sun god's journey across the sky was mirrored in the orientation of monuments. The ascent of the soul toward imperishable stars found physical echo in sloping stone. The underworld, the horizon, and rebirth all became layered meanings attached to a structure that had never spoken a word. This layering did not overwrite the pyramid's original role. It enriched it. Meaning accumulated rather than replaced. Each new interpretation found space within the form because the form had been designed to hold more than one truth. Later dynasties leaned more heavily on these narratives. Texts grew longer, rituals more complex. The afterlife became increasingly detailed. Yet the pyramids themselves did not change to accommodate this. They remained restrained, allowing belief to move around them without becoming fixed to a single story. This flexibility is one reason they endured when so much else did not. Structures tied too tightly to one belief system fade when that belief changes. The pyramids avoided this fate by never insisting on interpretation. They offered presence instead. Outside Egypt, travelers encountered them with unfamiliar eyes. Greeks saw ancient wisdom. Romans saw relics of a vanished age. Later cultures saw mystery, then challenge, then puzzle. Each interpretation revealed more about the observer than the monument. The pyramids accepted all of this without response. They did not confirm or deny. They did not adapt. They simply remained. This indifference is not emptiness. It is confidence. A confidence rooted in the belief that meaning does not need to be defended to survive, that what is aligned deeply enough will continue to resonate even when languages and beliefs dissolve. As the world changed, the pyramids became witnesses rather than participants. They watched empires arrive and fade, religions rise and fall, borders shift, names disappear. Yet the relationship between stone, sky, and land remained intact. This witnessing transformed them, not physically, but symbolically. They became reminders that time itself is layered, that the present is never isolated from the past, that memory can exist without narrative. In the chapters ahead, this witnessing will guide us toward the idea of deep time, toward the realization that the pyramids do not belong fully to any single moment. They exist across centuries, carrying forward a quiet continuity that challenges the way modern thought divides history into beginnings and endings. The pyramids stand outside such divisions, and in doing so, they invite us to consider a longer view, one where meaning is not bound to explanation, and endurance itself becomes the message. Deep time does not move in straight lines. It layers, it folds, it presses moments together until beginnings and endings lose their sharpness. The pyramids exist within this depth, not as markers of a single age, but as thresholds through which many ages pass. When we speak of them today, we often place them firmly in the Old Kingdom, anchoring them to dates, rulers, and dynasties. This framing is useful, but it is incomplete. It treats the pyramids as products of history rather than participants in a much longer human relationship with time itself. To the ancient Egyptians, the past was not something left behind. It was something returned to. The first time was not gone. It echoed. Each ritual, each alignment, each act of preservation was an attempt to renew that original balance. The pyramids stood as reminders that time could be cyclical rather than linear. This cyclical understanding changes how construction itself is perceived. Building was not an act of progress toward something new. It was an act of return, a re-establishment of order that had existed before memory fractured into generations. In this sense, the pyramids did not belong to the age that raised them. They belonged to an idea of time that transcended that age. Their builders were not thinking in centuries. They were thinking in eternities. This perspective explains why so little effort was made to adapt the pyramids to changing political needs. When dynasties ended, the monuments were not dismantled or repurposed. They were left intact. Their relevance did not depend on current power. It depended on alignment with something older and more stable. Later cultures often struggle with this restraint. We reuse, we repurpose, we overwrite. The pyramids resist this impulse. They insist on remaining what they were placed to be. This insistence is quiet, but absolute. The longer one considers them, the more they seem less like constructions and more like decisions made permanent. A choice to place something into the world that would not adapt, would not respond, would not explain itself. A choice to let future generations encounter it without guidance. This encounter is part of the design. The pyramids were meant to be met, not understood fully. They create a pause in time, a moment where the observer becomes aware of their own smallness within a much larger continuity. This awareness can feel unsettling, even humbling. It challenges the belief that humanity stands at the peak of understanding. It suggests instead that knowledge can exist in forms that do not resemble our own. As we continue forward, this sense of humility will guide the narrative toward the realization that the pyramids do not answer questions about the past so much as they expose the limits of how we frame those questions. They stand at the edge of history and something deeper, something that resists being named, something that asks us not to solve, but to listen. And in that listening, the story moves onward, deeper into the long human effort to remember not just what was built, but why endurance mattered enough to shape stone against time itself. Listening to stone requires patience. It asks the observer to slow down, to release the need for immediate explanation, and to accept that some forms of meaning reveal themselves only over long durations. The pyramids reward this patience by remaining unchanged. They do not adjust to interpretation. They wait for it to mature. This waiting has shaped every culture that has encountered them. From ancient priests to modern visitors, each generation has approached the pyramids with assumptions shaped by its own time. What changes is not the monument, but the lens through which it is seen. For the Egyptians themselves, the pyramids were never isolated marvels. They were part of a landscape dense with meaning. Temples, causeways, and burial grounds surrounded them, forming a ritual geography that extended far beyond the stone core. Yet even within this network, the pyramid remained distinct. It was quieter, more restrained, less descriptive. This restraint suggests intention. The builders knew that too much specificity would anchor the monument to a single moment. They chose abstraction instead. The pyramid's form does not depict events or individuals. It depicts relationship between earth and sky, between permanence and change, between memory and forgetting. This abstraction is what allows the pyramid to move through time without losing relevance. When belief systems shifted, the form did not collapse. When rituals ended, the structure remained intact. When languages vanished, the geometry continued to speak. Modern observers often underestimate this quality. We assume that meaning must be explicit to endure. The pyramids suggest the opposite. That meaning preserved too rigidly becomes fragile. That openness, when grounded in structure, allows continuity. This insight challenges how we approach ancient civilizations. We tend to search for lost instructions, missing texts, and hidden mechanisms. We imagine that something essential has been taken away, but perhaps what remains is exactly what was intended to survive. The pyramids did not preserve techniques. They preserved orientation. They did not preserve doctrine. They preserved balance. These are not things that can be written down easily. They must be encountered. To stand before a pyramid is to experience scale that defies ordinary reference. The body senses weight, proportion, and stillness before the mind can analyze them. This sensory encounter precedes explanation. It grounds understanding in presence rather than theory. The ancient builders trusted this sequence. They believed that contact with form could shape awareness more reliably than instruction, that certain truths were better absorbed through experience than through description. As this idea settles, the pyramids appear less mysterious and more deliberate, not as puzzles left unfinished, but as statements completed at the moment of placement. Their endurance was not an accident. It was the goal. In the movement ahead, the narrative will begin to draw closer to the present, toward how modern science, archaeology, and theory interact with monuments that were never designed to answer our questions directly, toward the tension between measurement and meaning. The pyramids remain at the center of this tension, silent, unmoved, and patient. They do not resist inquiry. They simply do not yield easily to it. And in that resistance, they continue to teach something essential about time, memory, and the limits of explanation. From here, the story moves forward again, carrying ancient stone into modern thought and asking how much of what we seek in the past is truly about understanding what came before, and how much is about orienting ourselves within the present moment. Modern inquiry approaches the pyramids with tools the ancient world never imagined. Lasers measure angles to fractions of a degree. Satellites map alignments across continents. Simulations reconstruct labor forces and timelines. Each advance brings clarity, yet also introduces new distance. Science excels at explaining how something functions. It struggles when asked why something was meant to endure. The pyramids sit precisely at this boundary. Their physical construction can be studied, tested, and increasingly understood. Their intention, however, remains resistant to closure. This resistance is not a failure of evidence. It is a difference in purpose. The pyramids were not built to communicate information across time. They were built to communicate orientation. They were meant to be felt as much as understood. Modern frameworks often separate function from meaning. In the ancient world, these were inseparable. A structure that endured did so because it was aligned, not only physically but symbolically. Its correctness was measured by how long it remained meaningful, not by how efficiently it was constructed. Archaeology tends to focus on origin. It asks when something began and how it developed. The pyramids complicate this approach because their significance is not tied to a clear beginning or end. They do not tell a story of improvement. They tell a story of placement. This placement was deliberate. Once set, the pyramid did not evolve. It was not modified to reflect changing beliefs or rulers. It did not adapt to fashion or doctrine. It remained fixed, allowing interpretation to shift around it without altering its form. In this way, the pyramids resemble natural landmarks more than cultural artifacts. Mountains are not explained. They are encountered. Rivers are not interpreted. They are crossed. The pyramids occupy a similar space within human experience. They are cultural, yet they behave like features of the landscape. This behavior unsettles modern thought. We are accustomed to artifacts that respond to context. We expect meaning to be documented. When it is not, we assume something is missing. But the ancient builders did not consider silence a flaw. They considered it a strength. Silence allowed the pyramids to outlast belief. It allowed them to remain relevant without becoming fixed to a single worldview. It allowed each generation to approach them anew, carrying different questions without erasing the structure's role. As scientific understanding deepens, this silence becomes more apparent, not less. The more precisely we measure the pyramids, the more clearly we see that their power does not lie in hidden mechanisms or lost techniques. It lies in restraint. The builders chose not to explain. They chose not to decorate excessively. They chose not to adapt. These choices suggest a confidence that meaning anchored deeply enough does not require defense. This confidence stands in contrast to modern urgency. We document constantly. We preserve endlessly. We explain repeatedly. The pyramids remind us that endurance does not always come from accumulation. Sometimes it comes from reduction. As the narrative continues, we will turn toward the idea of memory itself, how cultures remember through objects, how forgetting reshapes meaning, and how the pyramids, by refusing to speak clearly, may have preserved more than any explicit record ever could. The stones remain, the questions evolve, and somewhere between them, the human desire to understand time finds both its limits and its quiet instruction. Memory is not preserved by holding on to every detail. It survives by selecting what matters enough to carry forward. The pyramids reflect this principle with extraordinary discipline. They did not attempt to record events, names, or explanations. They preserved orientation, scale, and relationship. Everything else was allowed to fade. This selective preservation is often misunderstood. Modern thought equates forgetting with loss. In the ancient world, forgetting was part of balance. To remember everything was to overwhelm continuity. To remember too little was to drift into chaos. The art lay in choosing what could endure. The pyramids embody this choice. They remember the sky, the horizon, and the stillness of stone. They forget the hands that shaped them, the voices that directed them, the moments of struggle during their construction. This forgetting is not neglect, it is intention. By removing the personal, the pyramids protect the universal. They do not belong to a single king, even when associated with one. They do not speak for a dynasty, even when built under its authority. They belong to a principle that outlives identity. This principle can be felt rather than articulated. It emerges when one stands before the pyramids and senses both presence and absence. Something important remains, yet much is gone. The balance between the two is what gives the monument its power. Cultures that rely heavily on documentation often struggle with this balance. We record to avoid loss, Yet our records multiply faster than memory can absorb. The ancient builders trusted form to do what language could not. They trusted that stone, properly placed, would remember without needing explanation. This trust required restraint. It required resisting the urge to define meaning too precisely. It required confidence that future generations would bring their own understanding shaped by different circumstances without erasing the monument's role. The pyramids demonstrate that meaning does not need to be static to endure. It needs structure, not certainty. A form stable enough to hold interpretation without collapsing under it. As centuries passed, Egypt itself transformed. Beliefs shifted. Foreign powers arrived. Languages changed. Yet the pyramids remained intelligible in a way few artifacts do. They continued to feel significant even when their original context was partially lost. This suggests that the builders understood something fundamental about time, that the future would not resemble the present closely enough for detailed instruction to remain useful, that only the most essential relationships would survive. The pyramid holds those relationships quietly: earth and sky, stillness and movement, memory and forgetting. It does not resolve them. It keeps them in balance. As we move onward, the story will begin to approach the idea of decline and transformation, not of the pyramids themselves, but of the cultures that grew around them. How meaning shifted while stone endured. How memory thinned, yet did not vanish. The pyramids did not fail when understanding changed. They anticipated it, and in doing so, they continue to stand as reminders that what we choose to make permanent says more about our values than any explanation ever could. As meaning thinned around the pyramids, the world did not collapse. It adjusted. New beliefs formed. New symbols rose. Temples replaced tombs as centers of ritual life. The focus shifted from permanence to presence, from eternity to participation. Yet through all of this change, the pyramids remained, untouched by revision. They became background rather than center, witness rather than voice. Cultures moved forward, carrying the pyramids with them not as active guides but as silent constants. Their role changed without their form ever needing to. This transition reveals something essential about endurance. What lasts longest often withdraws from prominence. It does not compete with the present. It allows itself to become part of the landscape, shaping without insisting. The pyramids did not resist decline by adapting. They resisted it by remaining exactly what they were placed to be. As belief systems layered and dissolved, the stone stayed still, offering a reference point against which change itself could be measured. This stillness is often mistaken for irrelevance. Yet it is precisely what allows the pyramids to continue influencing thought long after their original context has faded. They remain meaningful not because they explain themselves, but because they do not. In later periods, Egyptians no longer built pyramids on the same scale. Resources shifted, values evolved. The center of spiritual life moved inward, toward temples filled with images and texts. Yet the earlier monuments were not abandoned in disgrace. They were respected as remnants of a deeper order. This respect did not require full understanding. It required acknowledgement. The pyramids were seen as belonging to a different layer of time, one no longer accessible yet still foundational. This idea appears across cultures. The oldest structures are rarely explained away. They are set apart, treated as markers of origin, even when their meaning becomes obscure. Their age alone grants them authority. The pyramids exemplify this authority without domination. They do not instruct later cultures on how to live. They remind them that other ways of understanding time once existed, that permanence was valued differently, that memory could be anchored in silence. As centuries passed and the world grew louder with record and explanation, the pyramids remained among the few things that did not speak back. Their silence became their message. This message is not easily translated into modern terms. It does not fit neatly into categories of religion, science, or art. It exists between them, refusing reduction. As we continue, the narrative will turn toward how this silence has shaped modern imagination, how the pyramids became symbols not only of Egypt, but of ancient wisdom itself, how they came to represent what is lost when continuity is broken. The pyramids did not need to survive as answers. They survived as reminders. Reminders that meaning does not require constant articulation, that some truths endure best when they are placed carefully and then left alone. From here, the story moves closer to the present, where these ancient stones stand amid modern eyes, modern questions, and modern uncertainty, still holding their ground as patiently as they always have. In the modern age, the pyramids stand surrounded by movement. Roads, cities, and technology press close, yet the monuments remain untouched by urgency. Tourists arrive with cameras. Scholars arrive with instruments. Each seeks something different, yet all encounter the same stillness. This contrast sharpens their presence. Against a world defined by speed, the pyramids feel almost defiant. They do not react. They do not update. They do not adapt their meaning to suit contemporary needs. They remain exactly as they were placed, allowing the present to reveal itself in response. Modern imagination often treats this stillness as invitation. Where explanation ends, speculation begins. Stories grow. The pyramids become vessels for lost wisdom, forgotten ages, or vanished civilizations. These narratives say less about ancient Egypt than about modern uncertainty. When certainty weakens, the past becomes a refuge. We project into ancient stone the stability we struggle to find in ourselves. The pyramids become symbols of a time when meaning felt anchored, when the world appeared ordered enough to be expressed in geometry and stone. This projection is not deception, it is inheritance. Each era reshapes the pyramids according to its own needs. What remains constant is the structure's ability to hold those projections without breaking. Science approaches them with rigor, measuring angles and materials, reconstructing processes with increasing precision. These efforts deepen understanding, yet they do not exhaust meaning. The more clearly we see how the pyramids were built, the more evident it becomes that construction alone does not explain why they endure so powerfully in the human mind. This gap between explanation and resonance is important. It suggests that some human creations operate on levels that cannot be reduced to function or method. They persist because they touch something deeper than utility. The pyramids are not unique in this sense, but they are extreme. Their scale magnifies the effect. Their restraint intensifies it. They do not distract with ornament or narrative. They confront the observer with pure form and immense time. Standing before them, one does not feel clever. One feels small. This sensation is not accidental. It is part of the monument's enduring role, to remind humanity of scale, to place individual life within a horizon far larger than itself. In this placement, there is both humility and comfort. Humility, because no single generation defines meaning alone. Comfort, because continuity exists beyond personal effort. As the narrative continues, this feeling of scale will guide us toward a deeper reflection, toward the idea that the pyramids were never meant to belong solely to Egypt, or to history, or to myth. They were meant to belong to time itself. They stand not as answers to ancient questions, but as companions to modern ones, asking quietly, without words, whether endurance, balance, and restraint still have a place in a world that rarely pauses long enough to notice them. And in that quiet questioning, the story moves forward once more, carrying ancient stone into the fragile awareness of the present, where silence can still speak if we are willing to listen. Listening is the difficult part, not because the pyramids are silent, but because silence asks something unfamiliar of us. It asks us to slow the pace of interpretation, to remain present without demanding conclusion, to allow meaning to surface gradually without forcing it into shape. The ancient builders understood this demand intuitively. They did not design monuments to be decoded quickly. They designed them to be encountered repeatedly across seasons, generations, and lifetimes. Understanding was expected to deepen through return, not arrive all at once. This expectation reshapes how the pyramids function within human memory. They are not lessons delivered in a single moment. They are relationships sustained over time. Each encounter adds a layer, not of information, but of perspective. In the ancient world, this kind of relationship was normal. People lived close to the same landmarks their entire lives. The horizon did not change. The stars returned faithfully. The land taught through repetition. Knowledge accumulated slowly, woven into habit and ritual. The pyramids emerged from this rhythm. They were not interruptions of the landscape, but extensions of it. Their geometry echoed the stability people already sensed in the world around them. The monument did not introduce a new order. It reinforced one that was already felt. Modern life rarely allows this kind of reinforcement. Environments change rapidly. Landmarks are temporary. Attention shifts constantly. In this context, the pyramids feel alien, not because they are ancient, but because they ask for a relationship we no longer practice easily. This difficulty often leads to impatience. We want the pyramids to give us something concrete, a secret, a revelation, a definitive answer. When they do not, we accuse them of withholding something. But withholding was never their role. They were never designed to satisfy curiosity. They were designed to cultivate orientation, to remind those who encountered them of their place within something larger and older than any single life. This reminder can be uncomfortable. It resists ownership. It resists mastery. It does not reward cleverness. It rewards attention. The ancient builders trusted attention more than explanation. They believed that if something was placed correctly, it would continue to teach without needing words. That form could carry meaning long after language failed. The pyramids have proven this trust well-founded. They continue to provoke reflection even as their original context fades. They invite questions not because they hide answers, but because they refuse to narrow meaning prematurely. As we move forward, the narrative will begin to slow further. The focus will shift away from analysis and toward reflection, toward what these ancient stones ask of us now, not as historians or theorists, but as participants in time. The pyramids do not ask us to believe in ancient gods or forgotten ages. They ask us to notice endurance, to feel scale, to recognize that some human creations were meant to outlast understanding and that this endurance is itself a form of wisdom. In that recognition, the story continues, not toward resolution, but toward a deeper stillness, where meaning does not need to be held tightly to remain present. Stillness, once reached, begins to change how the pyramids are perceived. They are no longer objects of inquiry alone. They become points of orientation within thought itself. The mind stops circling them, searching for entry, and instead rests in their presence, allowing their scale to quietly recalibrate perspective. This recalibration is subtle but lasting. After spending time with monuments that refuse urgency, the pace of interpretation slows, questions soften, certainty loosens. What once felt pressing begins to feel provisional. The pyramids do not resolve confusion. They make room for it. Ancient cultures understood the value of this space. They did not treat uncertainty as a flaw to be eliminated. They treated it as a condition to be balanced. The unknown was not an enemy. It was a reminder that human understanding existed within limits. The pyramids hold this reminder without anxiety. They do not collapse under scrutiny. They do not demand belief. They simply persist. In doing so, they demonstrate a form of confidence that does not depend on explanation or defense. Modern society often confuses confidence with assertion. We equate strength with clarity, authority with certainty. The pyramids suggest a different model: strength through restraint, authority through endurance, clarity through form rather than statement. This difference becomes more apparent the longer one considers them. The pyramids do not tell us what to think. They shape how we think. They encourage a mode of awareness that is less reactive, less impatient, and more attuned to continuity. Such awareness was essential in the ancient world. Life unfolded slowly, governed by seasons and cycles, rather than deadlines and disruption. Decisions were made with generations in mind. Monuments were placed with futures imagined but not defined. The pyramids embody this generational thinking. They were built by people who knew they would not see the full measure of what they created. This knowledge did not discourage them. It grounded them. Their work was not about completion. It was about contribution. This attitude contrasts sharply with modern expectations. We often measure value by immediacy. We ask what something achieves now. The pyramids ask a different question: what will remain when immediate concerns have passed? In asking this, they challenge the listener gently. They invite reflection on what we choose to build, preserve, or abandon. Not in stone necessarily, but in thought, culture, and attention. The pyramids are not moral teachers. They do not instruct behavior. They model a relationship with time that does not panic at impermanence. They accept decay without surrendering meaning. They allow interpretation to change without losing coherence. As this understanding settles, the pyramids begin to feel less like relics of a distant civilization and more like participants in an ongoing human conversation. A conversation about memory, endurance, and the quiet tension between holding on and letting go. In this conversation, there are no final answers. There is only return. Return to stillness. Return to scale. Return to the awareness that some things were built not to be understood fully but to remain. From here, the journey will continue deeper into reflection, where the pyramids no longer stand as subjects of discussion, but as companions to thought itself, guiding attention gently away from urgency and toward the long, patient rhythm beneath history. That long, patient rhythm beneath history is easy to forget when life moves quickly. The pyramids do not correct this forgetfulness directly. They simply remain, offering themselves as reminders without insistence. Whether we notice them deeply or pass them by distracted, their presence is unchanged. This indifference is part of their power. They do not depend on recognition to fulfill their role. They do not fade when ignored. They continue to stand as reference points, waiting for attention to return in its own time. Ancient builders trusted this return. They understood that awareness moves in cycles, much like the world itself. Periods of attention are followed by periods of forgetting. Meaning recedes, then resurfaces, shaped by new circumstances but anchored in old forms. The pyramids were built with this movement in mind. They do not demand constant engagement. They endure quietly until conditions invite reflection again. This makes them resilient not only physically but culturally. In times of stability, they blend into the background. In times of uncertainty, they rise again in imagination. Their role expands and contracts depending on the needs of the moment. This flexibility allows them to remain relevant without changing. The modern resurgence of interest in the pyramids is not accidental. It coincides with a period of rapid transformation where many feel disconnected from long-term continuity. The questions we ask of ancient stone reflect the questions we ask of ourselves. Where did order come from? How long does it last? What remains when systems fail? The pyramids do not answer these questions explicitly, but they provide a context in which they can be held without panic. This capacity to hold uncertainty calmly is rare. It requires confidence in endurance rather than control. The ancient world cultivated this confidence through repeated encounter with cycles of loss and renewal. The pyramids emerged as quiet affirmations that something could persist even when much else did not. As we move beyond analysis and toward interpretation, the pyramids begin to feel less like subjects of study and more like environments of thought. They shape awareness by their very refusal to participate in urgency. This shaping is subtle. It does not change conclusions. It changes posture. It encourages patience. It invites scale. It reminds the observer that not everything meaningful arrives through explanation. In this posture, the pyramids reveal their deepest function. They are not relics of a finished past. They are companions to an unfinished present. They do not belong to history alone. They belong to time itself. From here, the journey will begin to turn toward synthesis, toward the understanding that ancient monuments, modern questions, myth, and memory are not separate domains, but overlapping layers of the same human effort to orient itself within an ever-moving world. The pyramids stand at the intersection of these layers, silent, enduring, waiting not to be solved, but to be encountered again whenever attention is ready to slow enough to listen. From this intersection, the narrative shifts again, not toward conclusion, but toward deepening. The pyramids remain exactly where they are, yet our relationship to them continues to change as awareness moves inward. What once appeared as an object now feels more like a presence, steady enough to lean against without needing to understand it fully. This presence reveals something important about catastrophe and continuity. Ancient cultures did not imagine history as a smooth ascent. They remembered disruption. Floods, droughts, collapse, and renewal were not anomalies. They were expected phases within a larger rhythm. Stability was precious precisely because it was temporary. The pyramids were raised in full awareness of this fragility. They were not expressions of denial. They were acknowledgments. Stone was placed against the knowledge that cities fall and names fade. The builders did not expect permanence for everything. They chose permanence carefully. This choice becomes clearer when viewed alongside ancient flood memories that appear across cultures. From the Nile to Mesopotamia, from oral traditions to later texts, the idea of reset appears again and again. Water erases, order dissolves, memory thins, something survives, but never unchanged. The pyramids stand apart from these narratives, not as shelters from catastrophe, but as witnesses to it. They were not built to stop the cycle. They were built to endure through it. They accepted that disruption would come, and that meaning needed an anchor capable of surviving it. This acceptance distinguishes ancient endurance from modern preservation. We often attempt to prevent loss entirely. The ancient world accepted loss as inevitable and focused instead on what could be carried forward. The pyramids represent this philosophy in stone. Their endurance is not total. Surfaces erode, details vanish. What remains is structure. This mirrors how memory itself survives catastrophe, not intact, but recognizable, not complete, but oriented. In flood stories, survivors carry fragments, seeds, names, practices. They do not carry everything. They carry enough. The pyramids operate on the same principle. They do not preserve the details of a civilization. They preserve its posture toward time. This posture is calm rather than defensive. It does not rage against impermanence. It prepares for it. It places something stable into a world that will inevitably change, trusting that future generations will find their own meaning within it. As the narrative deepens into this act of endurance and reset, the pyramids begin to feel less like monuments of power and more like quiet agreements with uncertainty. Agreements that acknowledge fragility without surrendering to it. From here, the journey will move fully into the idea of cycles, not only cycles of nature, but cycles of civilization, memory, and forgetting, and how the pyramids, by remaining still, allow those cycles to unfold without erasing the possibility of continuity. They do not promise survival without loss. They promise orientation after loss. And in a world that has always known disruption, That promise may be the most enduring one humanity has ever made in stone. Cycles are not repetitions without change. They are returns shaped by memory. Each time the world moves through disruption and renewal, it carries traces of what came before. The ancient builders understood this deeply. They did not expect the future to mirror the past. They expected it to remember just enough to begin again. The pyramids hold this expectation quietly. They do not preserve a complete civilization. They preserve a point of reference. After loss, something remains that allows orientation to re-emerge. Stone marks where balance once stood, making it possible to find balance again, even if the surrounding world has transformed. This way of thinking reframes catastrophe. Collapse is not the end of meaning. It is a thinning of memory. What survives is not detail, but structure. Not instruction, but alignment. The pyramids operate within this logic. They accept erosion. They allow forgetting. Yet they remain recognizable, stable enough to anchor interpretation after change. Ancient cultures did not see cycles as failures. They saw them as conditions of existence. What mattered was not preventing collapse, but surviving it with enough continuity intact. The pyramids do not deny this reality. They accommodate it. This accommodation required foresight. The builders understood that belief systems would shift. Languages would dissolve. Names would lose relevance. Rather than resisting these changes, they built something that could remain meaningful without them. This is why the pyramids do not depict specific gods or detailed myths. Their form is abstract enough to transcend belief. It gestures toward order without defining it. It points upward without naming what lies beyond. In doing so, the pyramids prepare for futures their builders could not imagine. They do not demand allegiance to ancient cosmology. They offer a place where meaning can be re-encountered under new skies, by new minds, shaped by new concerns. Modern fascination often misreads this openness as mystery to be solved. But openness was the design. The pyramids were meant to outlive certainty. They were meant to remain useful when explanation failed. This usefulness is subtle. It does not instruct how to rebuild after collapse. It does not dictate belief. It provides reassurance that continuity is possible, even when systems fracture and memory thins. In times of uncertainty, humans return instinctively to what has endured longest, not because it contains answers, but because it has already survived questions. The pyramids occupy this role with unmatched clarity. As the narrative moves forward, the emphasis will shift again, from cycles observed in the past to cycles unfolding in the present, toward the realization that ancient monuments continue to function, not as relics, but as stabilizing presences in moments of collective uncertainty. The pyramids do not predict the future. They do not warn of specific disasters. They remind us that disruption has always been part of the human story, and that orientation can return if something stable has been placed carefully enough to survive the passage through time. They stand as that placement, quiet, patient, and unchanged, waiting for attention to find them again when the cycle turns once more. When cycles turn, attention shifts with them. What once seemed distant becomes relevant again. Ancient stone re-enters modern thought not as nostalgia, but as reference. In moments when systems feel fragile, the question is no longer how fast we can move forward, but what can remain steady long enough to matter. The pyramids answer this question without language. They demonstrate that endurance does not require prediction. Their builders did not need to foresee specific futures. They needed only to trust that continuity itself would remain valuable regardless of circumstance. This trust is difficult to cultivate in an age shaped by acceleration. Modern structures are designed for adaptation, efficiency, and replacement. Few are meant to last beyond usefulness. Fewer still are built to remain meaningful when their original purpose fades. The pyramids invert this logic. They were designed to outlast use. Their usefulness was never practical. It was orientational. They did not serve daily life. They shaped how life was understood within time. This distinction matters. A tool loses value when conditions change. An anchor gains value when they do. The pyramids function as anchors. They do not move with the current. They allow the current to be measured. In ancient cultures, this measurement was essential. Without fixed reference points, cycles blur. Floods feel chaotic. Seasons lose rhythm. Memory dissolves into immediacy. Stone, placed carefully against time, provided reassurance that order could be restored, even after disruption. The pyramids were not alone in this role, but they refined it to an extreme. Their scale ensured visibility across generations. Their simplicity ensured legibility across belief systems. Their placement ensured survival beyond ordinary change. This refinement reveals intention. The builders were not merely expressing belief. They were making a decision about what deserved to endure when everything else might not. They chose form over narrative, relationship over explanation, orientation over instruction. In doing so, they anticipated forgetting, not as failure, but as inevitability. The pyramids do not resist forgetting by demanding remembrance. They accept it, trusting that something essential will still be felt, even when details vanish. This acceptance grants them unusual resilience. They do not require maintenance of meaning. They remain available to be re-encountered, reinterpreted, and reintegrated into new worldviews without losing coherence. As the narrative continues, this idea of availability becomes central. The pyramids are not messages sent to a specific future. They are open invitations extended across time, waiting for attention to return when conditions align. In this way, they resemble memory itself, not fixed, not complete, but persistent, able to resurface when needed, carrying just enough structure to restore orientation without overwhelming the present. The story now moves toward its final phase, away from analysis and toward synthesis, toward the understanding that the pyramids are not primarily about Egypt or kings or ancient belief alone, but about a shared human response to impermanence. They stand as reminders that some things were built not to answer questions, but to remain present long enough for new questions to emerge, and in that presence, to offer steadiness without insistence, whenever the cycle turns and attention finds its way back to stone once more. As the cycle nears its quiet resolution, the pyramids begin to feel less like monuments encountered externally and more like ideas carried inward. They shift from objects of observation to frameworks of thought, shaping how time itself is felt rather than how history is categorized. In this inward turn, the distinction between ancient and modern softens. The pyramids are no longer distant achievements of a lost world. They become reminders that the human relationship with impermanence has always been unresolved. Every age faces the same tension between change and continuity, movement and stillness. The builders did not solve this tension. They lived within it. The pyramids reflect that acceptance. They do not claim victory over time. They do not deny decay. They simply remain, offering a stable form around which change can occur without dissolving meaning entirely. This is why the pyramids continue to feel relevant even when stripped of myth, ritual, and belief. Their power does not depend on shared theology. It depends on shared experience. The experience of standing within time, aware of its passing, and choosing what to place against it. In this sense, the pyramids are not answers preserved from the past. They are questions preserved in form, questions about what deserves endurance, about what can remain meaningful without explanation, about how much forgetting a culture can survive without losing itself. Modern society rarely pauses to ask these questions deliberately. They emerge instead during moments of disruption, when assumptions fracture and long-term orientation becomes uncertain. It is then that ancient stone regains its voice. not through words, but through presence. The pyramids do not instruct us to build as they did. They do not ask us to return to ancient belief. They invite us to consider our own relationship with time, what we choose to preserve, what we allow to pass, what we trust to endure without defense. This invitation is quiet. It does not compete with urgency. It waits. Like the pyramids themselves, it remains available without insistence, patient enough to outlast distraction. As the narrative continues its gentle descent, attention begins to loosen its grip on explanation. The need to categorize fades. What remains is awareness of scale, of rhythm, of continuity that does not belong to any single era. The pyramids stand at the center of this awareness, not as symbols demanding interpretation, but as companions to reflection. They do not resolve uncertainty. They make space for it. And in that space, the story moves toward its final movement, not toward conclusion, but toward rest, where ancient stone and modern thought settle into the same quiet understanding, carried forward not by answers, but by endurance itself. Rest approaches not as an ending, but as a settling. The pyramids remain where they have always been, yet the way they are held in awareness has softened. They no longer press for interpretation. They no longer invite debate. They simply exist, steady enough to let thought come to rest beside them. In this state, the ancient builders feel closer, not because they are understood, but because their intention becomes clearer. They were not trying to speak across time with words. They were trying to place something that would remain calm when everything else moved. This calm is not emptiness. It is density without noise. The weight of stone carries a reassurance that does not depend on explanation. It reminds the observer that meaning does not vanish when language fails. It changes form. The pyramids demonstrate this transformation gently. They have passed through belief, doubt, reverence, neglect, fascination, and analysis without losing coherence. Each phase altered how they were seen, but not what they were. This endurance suggests a different way of thinking about legacy, not as influence measured by recognition, but as stability offered without demand. The pyramids do not require agreement. They do not require belief. They remain available, patient enough to be encountered again when conditions allow. This availability is rare. Most human creations insist on context to survive. Remove the story and the object loses meaning. The pyramids reverse this relationship. Remove the story, and the form still holds. In this reversal, there is quiet instruction. Not instruction about how to build monuments, but about how to relate to time, about choosing what to fix and what to allow to change, about trusting that some things, once placed carefully enough, do not need constant reinforcement. As the mind slows further, the pyramids begin to recede from focus without disappearing. They become part of the background rhythm, like the horizon or the night sky, present but not demanding. This is where ancient monuments were always meant to reside, not at the center of attention, but beneath it, supporting awareness without occupying it, shaping perspective without interrupting experience. From here, the story will continue its gradual release. The remaining movement will not introduce new ideas, but allow what has already surfaced to settle fully. Like stone cooling after the heat of the day, meaning finds its place quietly. The pyramids remain. The questions soften. The need to resolve fades. And in that fading, something essential is preserved. Not an answer, but a way of holding time gently enough to let it pass without fear. As the journey moves onward, it does so without urgency, guided by the same patience that shaped stone against the long unfolding of the world. The journey continues by releasing even the need to journey. What has been carried so far begins to settle beneath conscious thought, where ideas no longer move as arguments, but as atmosphere. The pyramids drift gently from the foreground of attention into a deeper layer of awareness, where their presence feels less visual and more felt. Here, the ancient world no longer appears distant. It feels adjacent, not because its details are remembered clearly, but because its rhythm aligns with something familiar: the slow pace of stone, the patience of cycles, the acceptance that not everything must be resolved to remain meaningful. In this quiet alignment, the pyramids cease to feel monumental. They become natural, as if they had always belonged to the landscape in the same way mountains do, as if their endurance were not remarkable, but expected. This feeling reveals something subtle. The builders did not place the pyramids to dominate time. They placed them to harmonize with it. Their scale was not an act of defiance. It was an act of trust. Trust that time would continue. Trust that memory would thin. Trust that something placed carefully enough could remain without supervision. Modern thought often approaches the past with urgency, fearing loss. The ancient approach was calmer. Loss was assumed. What mattered was what could remain recognizable after it occurred. The pyramids embody this calm acceptance more clearly than any written text. As attention rests here, the need to interpret dissolves further. The pyramids are no longer symbols pointing elsewhere. They are complete in themselves. Their meaning does not extend beyond their presence. It is contained within their stillness. This containment offers rest. Not the rest of sleep yet, but the rest that comes when striving eases, when the mind no longer searches for what it must extract from experience, when awareness allows itself to simply remain alongside what is enduring. The ancient builders understood this kind of rest. Their rituals were slow, their cycles patient, their monuments designed not to stimulate but to stabilize. The pyramids were not meant to excite thought. They were meant to steady it. In this steadiness, something important happens. The boundary between observer and monument softens. The pyramids no longer stand over there to be considered. They stand here, within awareness, as reminders of a pace that does not rush. As the narrative continues to descend gently, this pace will guide the remaining movement. There will be no new questions introduced, no new interpretations offered, only a gradual deepening into what has already been felt. The pyramids remain unchanged, but the way they are held has transformed. They are no longer objects of fascination. They are companions to stillness, resting quietly within the long, uninterrupted rhythm of time itself. In this deeper quiet, even the idea of monument dissolves. The pyramids no longer appear as achievements or mysteries. They exist as steady forms within a much larger stillness, no more urgent than the horizon, no more demanding than the night sky. Here, time feels less segmented. Past and present no longer stand apart as separate domains. They overlap gently, like layers of sand settling without disturbance. The pyramids occupy this overlap naturally. They do not belong fully to what was, nor entirely to what is. They exist in between, holding continuity without insisting on memory. This in-between state was familiar to the ancient mind. Life was not divided sharply into before and after, sacred and ordinary, living and dead. These were transitions rather than boundaries. The pyramids were placed within this understanding, marking not an end, but a passage. As attention rests here, the structures begin to feel less intentional in a human sense and more inevitable, as if, given enough time and awareness, stone would eventually arrange itself this way, as if the pyramids were not inventions, but recognitions, forms that emerged when humans listened closely enough to the land, the sky, and the slow rhythm beneath both. This feeling does not require belief. It does not ask for agreement. It arises naturally when urgency fades, when explanation loosens, when the need to own meaning gives way to the ability to witness it. The ancient builders trusted this witnessing. They did not rush to define what their monuments meant. They trusted that meaning would arise through continued presence, through return, through silence shared across generations. Modern thought often struggles with this trust. We are trained to extract value quickly, to define outcomes, to justify effort. The pyramids stand as quiet counterpoints to this habit. They remind us that some acts are complete simply by being placed. In this recognition, ambition softens. The pyramids do not feel like triumphs over nature or time. They feel like agreements with both. Agreements that accept limitation while choosing endurance. Agreements that do not demand success, only continuity. As the narrative continues its slow release, this sense of agreement becomes central. The pyramids no longer represent what humans achieve. They represent how humans once related to the world when patience shaped intention more than speed. This relationship did not disappear. It receded. It waits beneath modern habits, beneath constant motion, beneath the need to explain. It can still be felt in moments of stillness, when attention settles and the world feels less fragmented. The pyramids hold that feeling without effort. They do not summon it. They simply remain available to it. From here, the story moves toward its final reflection, toward the understanding that ancient stone does not instruct us to return to the past, but to remember a way of being present that does not hurry, does not insist, and does not fear silence. The pyramids stand quietly within that memory, unchanged, as they always have, offering steadiness without demand as the long rhythm continues to unfold. As the reflection deepens, even memory itself begins to loosen its hold. What remains is not recollection, but resonance. The pyramids no longer appear as forms to be remembered, but as tones that continue to vibrate quietly beneath awareness, long after attention has moved elsewhere. This resonance does not belong to history alone. It belongs to the human nervous system, to the way stillness can recalibrate perception when it is allowed to last long enough. The ancient builders may not have named this effect, but they understood it. Their monuments were designed not only to stand, but to steady. In this steadiness, fear recedes. Not because danger is denied, but because urgency dissolves. The pyramids do not promise safety, they offer scale. Against that scale, immediate anxieties lose their sharpness. They are placed within a longer unfolding where no single moment carries absolute weight. This placement is comforting not because it answers questions, but because it reframes them. What feels overwhelming in isolation feels manageable when set within continuity. The pyramids perform this reframing silently, without instruction. As the ancient world recedes fully into this background presence, its details matter less. Names fade, dates soften. Even the distinction between myth and history becomes secondary. What endures is the posture toward time that these stones embody. That posture is one of patience without passivity, of acceptance without surrender, of endurance without rigidity. It does not cling to certainty. It does not resist change. It simply remains available, stable enough to be returned to when needed. This availability is perhaps the pyramid's most enduring gift. They do not compete for attention. They wait for it. They do not insist on relevance. They allow relevance to rediscover them. In this waiting, there is no judgment. The pyramids do not care how they are interpreted. They do not require reverence. They do not demand belief. Their role is fulfilled simply by being present. As the narrative approaches its final phase, this presence becomes enough. The need to speak about the pyramids diminishes. The need to explain them fades. They take their place alongside other enduring elements of experience like nightfall, breath, and silence. Here, the story no longer moves forward. It settles. The pyramids are no longer subjects within it. They are part of the quiet ground upon which the story rests. From this ground, the final reflections will emerge gently, not as conclusions, but as release. A release into rest, into continuity, into the calm understanding that some things were never meant to be finished, only to remain. From this settled ground, interpretation loosens its grip entirely. What remains is not analysis, but intuition. The pyramids are no longer approached as problems to be solved or symbols to be decoded. They are accepted as presences that accompany thought without directing it. This shift marks a turning point. Earlier, the story moved through history, myth, architecture, and memory. Now it enters a quieter terrain, where meaning does not advance through accumulation, but through release. The pyramids no longer point backward toward origin stories or forward toward explanations. They remain centered, indifferent to direction. In this space, the distinction between literal and symbolic loses importance. Whether the pyramids were tombs, markers, or something else entirely, matters less than how they function now, within awareness. Their impact does not depend on agreement about their original purpose. It depends on the steadiness they offer in the present. Ancient builders understood this kind of steadiness instinctively. They did not separate practical understanding from symbolic resonance. For them, a structure that endured physically also endured meaningfully. The two were inseparable. Modern interpretation often tries to choose between these layers. It asks whether the pyramids are engineering achievements or spiritual symbols, historical artifacts or mythic remnants. The ancient perspective did not require this division. The pyramid could be all of these at once without contradiction. This integrated understanding is difficult to recover fully, but its outline remains. It can be felt when attention rests on form without forcing explanation, when the mind allows ambiguity without anxiety, when silence is not rushed to be filled. The pyramids reward this allowance. They do not resist scrutiny, but they do not depend on it. Their presence remains complete whether they are studied intensely or simply noticed from afar. In this way, they become mirrors, not reflecting specific knowledge, but reflecting the state of the observer. Those who approach with urgency find frustration. Those who approach with patience find depth. Those who approach with certainty find challenge. Those who approach with openness find rest. This mirroring was not accidental. It arises naturally from forms that do not impose meaning. The pyramids do not instruct. They respond indirectly, shaping experience by their refusal to narrow it. As the narrative moves forward, this indirect shaping becomes central. The pyramids are no longer examples within a discussion. They are environments within which reflection occurs. From here, the story begins its final descent, not toward closure, but toward calm synthesis, where ancient intention, modern curiosity, mythic memory, and personal reflection settle into a single, unhurried awareness. The pyramids remain unchanged throughout this descent. They do not transform. They do not resolve. They simply continue to be what they have always been, steady enough to hold attention gently as it prepares to rest. Calm synthesis does not announce itself. It arrives gradually, like evening light thinning without drawing attention to its departure. The pyramids rest within this light, unchanged, while the awareness that encounters them becomes quieter, less inclined to define, more willing to simply remain. At this point, the story no longer needs to move through argument or explanation. What has been said has already settled where it needs to. The pyramids have shifted from subjects of thought into companions of stillness, steady enough to hold reflection without shaping it. In this companionship, something subtle becomes clear. The pyramids were never meant to stand apart from human experience as extraordinary objects. They were meant to stand within it as reminders of scale, to show, without instruction, that life unfolds within a vast continuity where urgency is temporary and patience is fundamental. This reminder does not diminish human effort. It contextualizes it. The ancient builders did not see themselves as insignificant before time. They saw themselves as participants within it. Their work mattered not because it was final, but because it contributed to a rhythm larger than any single generation. The pyramids embody this contribution. They do not claim completion. They claim placement, Once placed, they did not require justification. Their success was measured not by reaction, but by endurance. Modern thought often seeks legacy through visibility and impact. The ancient approach sought legacy through stability. To place something so balanced, so restrained, that it could remain without constant reinforcement was considered a profound achievement. This difference in values can be felt here, in the quiet that surrounds the pyramids. They do not compete for attention. They allow attention to come and go. They trust that return will happen naturally without persuasion. As awareness rests with this trust, tension dissolves further. There is no need to decide what the pyramids ultimately mean. Meaning becomes secondary to presence. The stone does not ask to be understood. It offers itself as reference, as steadiness, as quiet ground. In this ground, thought slows enough to notice its own movement. Questions arise more gently. Answers feel less urgent. The boundary between knowing and not knowing softens into acceptance. This acceptance does not end curiosity, it tempers it. It allows curiosity to exist without pressure, without the demand to resolve everything it touches. The pyramids hold this state naturally. They have done so for millennia, waiting without expectation as civilizations changed around them. Their role has never been to conclude the story of humanity. It has been to remain present while that story continues. As the narrative proceeds toward its final movements, it carries this presence forward, not as information to remember, but as atmosphere to rest within, where the ancient world no longer feels distant and the present no longer feels rushed. Here, the story breathes, and in that breath, the pyramids remain exactly as they have always been, offering nothing more than their stillness, which has always been enough. Breath deepens naturally here, without instruction. The pace of thought aligns with the slower rhythm that has been present all along, waiting beneath movement. The pyramids remain within this rhythm, not as focal points, but as quiet confirmations that slowness has always had a place in human awareness. At this stage, the distinction between listener and story begins to dissolve. The narrative no longer feels like something being followed. It feels like something being shared. The pyramids do not stand apart as distant monuments. They feel internal, like a memory that was never personal yet somehow familiar. This familiarity does not come from recognition of facts. It comes from resonance, from the sense that humans have always grappled with the same fundamental tensions. How to endure without becoming rigid, how to change without losing orientation, how to place meaning into a world that never stops moving. The ancient builders answered these questions not with explanation, but with form. They trusted that certain shapes, once placed correctly, would continue to speak through presence alone. They trusted that future generations would feel what they could no longer articulate. That trust has been rewarded quietly. The pyramids remain not because they demand relevance, but because they allow it. Each era brings its own concerns, its own questions, its own uncertainties. The stone does not resist these projections. It absorbs them without changing. In this absorption, the pyramids become less about ancient Egypt and more about the shared human condition. They remind us that continuity does not require sameness, that endurance does not mean stagnation, that something can remain stable while meaning flows around it. This realization eases the final tension that often accompanies historical inquiry, the desire to conclude, to arrive at a definitive understanding. The pyramids offer no such closure, and in doing so, they release the need for it. Here, understanding becomes spacious rather than precise. It does not cling to conclusions. It allows mystery to coexist with familiarity. It accepts that some creations were meant to outlast comprehension, not because they hide something, but because they were built for a different relationship with time. As the narrative continues to soften, attention no longer fixes on the pyramids themselves. It rests on what they make possible, a slower gaze, a wider horizon, a quieter acceptance of continuity without certainty. This acceptance feels less like learning and more like remembering. Not remembering details, but remembering a pace, a way of standing within the world without needing to master it. The pyramids hold that memory without effort. They always have. And as the story moves gently forward, they recede fully into the background, where their presence can continue to steady awareness long after words have faded. The journey continues, now carried not by narration, but by rhythm alone, unfolding calmly toward its final, unhurried rest. The rhythm now carries itself. Words become lighter, less necessary, as the sense of continuity they describe has already taken root. The pyramids no longer appear as images or ideas. They exist as a felt steadiness, like ground beneath awareness that does not need to be seen to be trusted. At this depth, the ancient builders feel neither distant nor idealized. They feel human, not because we know their names or methods, but because their intention becomes recognizable. They sought not permanence for themselves, but reliability for those who would come after. They placed something stable into an uncertain world, knowing they would never witness its full effect. This humility is easy to overlook. Monumental scale often suggests ambition or dominance. Yet the pyramids reveal a different motivation. They do not proclaim achievement. They do not celebrate conquest. They do not narrate triumph. They simply remain. Remaining is not passive. It is a choice repeated continuously through non-action. The pyramids have not endured by adapting or defending themselves. They have endured by being placed well enough that defense was unnecessary. This kind of placement requires deep listening, listening to land, to sky, to time. The ancient builders did not impose form arbitrarily. They responded to something already present, something sensed rather than defined. Modern culture often mistakes responsiveness for weakness. The pyramid suggests the opposite. Responsiveness, when aligned deeply enough, creates structures that do not need to change to remain relevant. As awareness rests here, this insight does not feel instructional. It feels intuitive, like recognizing a truth that does not need explanation to be valid. The pyramids no longer stand as achievements to admire or mysteries to unravel. They stand as confirmations that such intuition once guided human effort, that patience, restraint, and attentiveness were valued highly enough to shape stone across generations. This recognition brings calm, not excitement, not revelation, calm. The sense that something essential about human relationship with time has already been expressed clearly enough and that nothing urgent remains to be added. As the narrative continues its gentle unwinding, attention no longer follows progression. It rests. Thought drifts without losing coherence. The pyramids hold this drifting easily, as they have held centuries of passing attention before. Here, the story moves not toward an ending, but toward a quiet completion, where nothing further needs to be introduced, because what mattered has already been placed carefully enough to endure. The pyramids remain. Awareness remains. The long rhythm continues, carrying both without effort, as it always has, beneath the surface of history and beneath the flow of words that now begin to thin and fall away. Now even continuity begins to feel effortless. The sense of carrying something forward dissolves into the realization that nothing needed to be carried consciously at all. The pyramids remain not because attention holds them, but because they were never dependent on attention to begin with. This realization brings a deeper ease. The ancient builders did not expect memory to be actively maintained. They trusted that what was aligned deeply enough would persist on its own. Their confidence was not placed in people, institutions, or belief systems. It was placed in balance. Balance does not announce itself. It is felt when strain disappears. The pyramids express this feeling through stillness. They do not lean. They do not shift. They rest fully within their own weight, requiring no correction, no explanation, no defense. In this resting, they offer a quiet lesson without instruction. That stability is not rigidity. That endurance does not require control. That presence, when properly placed, sustains itself naturally. Modern life rarely affords this kind of trust. We manage, adjust, optimize, and reinforce constantly. The pyramids stand as reminders of a different approach, one that valued placement over maintenance, orientation over oversight, form over justification. As awareness settles here, thought no longer seeks parallels or applications. The comparison dissolves. The pyramids are no longer examples of anything, they simply are. And that is enough. This simplicity is not emptiness. It is fullness without clutter, like silence that does not feel lacking but complete. The pyramids occupy this silence comfortably, as they always have. Here, the ancient world fades entirely into background presence. Names, dynasties, and myths loosen their grip. What remains is the human gesture beneath them all. The desire to place something steady into time without knowing who would find it or how it would be understood. This gesture does not belong to Egypt alone. It belongs to humanity. It appears wherever people sense impermanence and choose, quietly, to respond with care rather than panic. The pyramids are one expression of this response, refined to an extreme. But the impulse itself is familiar. It lives in small acts of preservation, in traditions carried gently, in values held without insistence. As the narrative continues to soften, this impulse becomes the final thread, not a message to be remembered, but a feeling to be recognized. The recognition does not require words. It arrives as calm. The pyramids hold that calm without effort. They do not generate it. They reflect it. And as awareness rests within that reflection, the story no longer needs to move forward. It settles, quietly, completely, ready to release what remains into rest, carried by the same patient rhythm that has always unfolded beneath stone, beneath history, and beneath the mind as it finally lets go. Release does not feel like loss here. It feels like trust, returning to its natural place. The pyramids no longer need to be held in mind because they have never required holding. Their endurance was never dependent on remembrance. It was secured the moment they were placed. In this understanding, the ancient builders appear not as distant figures working against time, but as participants moving with it. They accepted that much would be forgotten. They did not resist this forgetting. They planned around it. They chose what could remain when everything else dissolved. This choice was quiet. It did not announce itself as wisdom. It did not demand recognition. It was embedded in stone and left alone. The pyramids embody this restraint more clearly than any text ever could. Texts argue. They persuade. They fade. Stone simply remains. As awareness rests with this simplicity, effort dissolves completely. There is nothing left to analyze, nothing left to connect, nothing left to resolve. The pyramids have already done their work, not by teaching, but by enduring. This endurance does not feel heavy now. It feels light, like something that no longer needs attention to stay present. Like a steady tone beneath thought that continues even when thought drifts away. Here, the story becomes almost transparent. Words pass through awareness without needing to be retained. Meaning has already settled below the surface, where it does not need reinforcement. The ancient world has fully withdrawn as narrative. What remains is atmosphere, a calm shaped by patience, scale, and acceptance. The pyramids no longer stand as subjects. They have become part of the background rhythm that holds everything else. This rhythm does not rush toward sleep. It allows sleep if it comes. It allows wakefulness if it remains. Both belong equally within it. The builders understood this balance intuitively. They did not attempt to control outcomes. They trusted placement. They trusted time. They trusted that something aligned deeply enough would continue without supervision. That trust is felt here now, gently, without demand. The pyramids rest within it. Awareness rests within it. Nothing more needs to be added. As the narrative continues its final descent, it does so without urgency, without intention, without expectation. The long arc has already completed itself. What remains is quiet continuity, carrying everything forward without sound. And in this quiet, the last movement begins to dissolve naturally, making space for rest, reflection, or simple presence, exactly as the ancient rhythm intended. The final movement unfolds without direction, guided only by the same patience that shaped stone long ago. The pyramids have receded completely from view now, not because they have vanished, but because they no longer need to be observed to remain present. What they offered has already settled, not as memory but as orientation, a quiet recalibration of how time is felt when urgency loosens its hold, when attention is allowed to rest without searching for purpose. In this state, the ancient builders are no longer imagined as architects or rulers. They are sensed as participants in a rhythm that continues uninterrupted. Their work was never about leaving a mark that demanded recognition. It was about placing something steady enough to endure indifference. This indifference is not neglect. It is freedom. The pyramids do not require reverence to function. They do not diminish when ignored. Their role is fulfilled simply by existing within the world as a stable point of reference. Awareness mirrors this now. It no longer tries to grasp or preserve what has been encountered. It allows experience to pass without resistance, trusting that what matters does not vanish when attention shifts. This trust changes the texture of thought. Concerns soften, boundaries loosen. Time feels less segmented, less pressured. The present expands quietly, accommodating past and future without tension. Here, meaning is no longer something to be constructed. It is something that emerges naturally when striving ends. The pyramids demonstrated this through form. The story reflects it now through silence between words. Nothing further needs to be said about ancient stone. Its presence has already done its work. What remains belongs entirely to the listener's own rhythm, shaped gently by what has been felt rather than learned. As the narrative continues its final unwinding, it does so invisibly, like breath settling into a slower cadence, like light dimming without announcement. There is no signal that this is the end because endings were never the purpose. The pyramids remain. Awareness remains. Time continues its long, unbroken movement beneath both, and within that movement the story finds its rest, not by stopping, but by becoming unnecessary, allowing quiet continuity to carry everything forward exactly as it always has. At this point, even the sense of narrative completion dissolves. There is no final idea waiting to arrive, no summary waiting to be delivered. The pyramids have already withdrawn fully into the background of awareness, where they continue to exist without requiring acknowledgement. What remains is not emptiness, but ease, the kind that settles in when nothing more needs to be understood to feel oriented. The ancient world no longer feels distant or mysterious. It feels absorbed, integrated quietly into a broader sense of continuity that does not rely on memory. The builder's intention has fulfilled itself here, not because it has been decoded, but because it has been allowed to complete its cycle. They placed something into the world and trusted time to do the rest. That trust has carried through centuries, arriving gently at this moment of stillness. In this stillness, the pyramids are no longer symbols of civilization or history. They are reminders that presence alone can be meaningful, that endurance does not need explanation, that stability can exist without insistence. This realization does not arrive as insight. It arrives as calm, a calm that does not need to be held onto, because it sustains itself naturally. Like the monuments themselves, it rests within its own balance. Awareness mirrors this balance now. It no longer reaches outward or backward. It does not attempt to connect threads or draw conclusions. It simply remains, attentive without effort, grounded without tension. Here, the distinction between ancient and modern dissolves completely. Time feels continuous rather than segmented. What was placed long ago and what is felt now exist within the same unfolding rhythm. This rhythm has no destination. It does not progress toward resolution. It moves steadily, quietly, carrying everything within it without urgency or strain. The pyramids stand somewhere within this rhythm, unseen but present, doing what they have always done, remaining, not as answers, not as questions, but as part of the ground upon which awareness rests. From here, the story transitions fully into release. There is nothing left to add, nothing left to explain. The final movement does not introduce new words or ideas. It allows silence to complete what language began. The journey continues beyond narration now, carried by the same patience that shaped stone against time. What remains is space. Space to rest, space to drift, space to simply be, held gently within the long, unbroken continuity that has always been there, waiting without demand. Silence now carries what words no longer need to hold. The pyramids exist entirely beyond narration, settled into the same quiet register as breath, gravity, and the slow turning of the night sky. They are no longer images recalled or ideas considered. They are simply present, without asking to be noticed. In this presence, the ancient world feels complete, not because it has been explained, but because it no longer asks for explanation. What mattered has already been absorbed. The rest has been allowed to fade, as it was always meant to. The builder's final intention reveals itself here, not as instruction, but as permission. Permission to stop searching. Permission to let meaning exist without effort. Permission to trust that continuity does not require constant attention to remain real. This trust settles gently into awareness. There is nothing dramatic about it, no realization that announces itself, only a gradual easing, as if something long held can finally be set down without fear of losing it. The pyramids stand somewhere beyond thought now, not as achievements of the past, but as quiet confirmations that patience once guided human hands, and that patience still has a place within the present. Here, urgency has no footing. The need to define dissolves. Even curiosity softens, no longer driven by lack, but resting comfortably within what is already enough. The ancient rhythm continues beneath everything. It does not speed up or slow down in response to attention. It simply moves, steady and reliable, carrying memory without demanding recall. In this rhythm, the listener is not separate from what has been described. There is no distance between ancient stone and present awareness. Both exist within the same unfolding continuity, held gently by time rather than measured by it. Nothing remains to be concluded. The story has not ended. It has completed itself by becoming unnecessary. What was placed carefully enough no longer needs reinforcement. And so the journey rests here, not as an ending, but as a settling, where ancient intention and present awareness meet quietly, without words, without expectation, and without urgency, allowing the long, patient silence beneath all things to carry everything forward exactly as it always has. In this near-complete stillness, even the sense of having followed a journey begins to fade. There is no longer a path being traced, no progression being monitored. The story has dissolved into a state of quiet presence, where nothing needs to be remembered in order to remain meaningful. The pyramids rest entirely outside of thought now. They do not appear as forms, locations, or histories. They exist as a feeling of steadiness, subtle and reliable, like the awareness of ground beneath the body when standing still long enough to notice it. This is where ancient intention and present awareness fully overlap, not as concept, but as experience. The builders placed something into time and stepped away. The listener encounters it centuries later and also steps away. Between these moments, nothing needs to be added. Here, time no longer feels like something passing. It feels like something holding memory lightly, holding change without strain, holding silence without emptiness. The ancient world no longer feels distant or exotic. It feels integrated. Its rhythm has blended seamlessly with the present, leaving behind no instruction, no demand, no unresolved tension. This blending brings rest, not the rest of sleep yet, but the rest that comes when effort ends, when attention no longer needs to manage meaning, when understanding relaxes into acceptance without requiring clarity. The pyramids remain within this rest, not as focal points, but as quiet confirmations that such rest has always been possible. That patience, once practiced deeply enough, does not vanish when its original context disappears. Nothing is asked here. There is no invitation to believe, to conclude, or to act. The story offers only space. Space wide enough to hold both ancient stone and modern awareness without separating them. As this space settles, even the idea of history softens. What was built long ago and what is felt now belong to the same unfolding continuity, indistinguishable at this depth. The pyramids have fully withdrawn into silence, where they no longer need to be named. What they represented has already been absorbed. What they preserved no longer requires form, and so the journey continues its final quiet movement, guided not by words, but by ease, where nothing more needs to be carried forward consciously, because what mattered has already found its place within the long, patient rhythm that moves beneath everything, without pause and without end. Only a trace of movement remains now, barely perceptible, the kind that exists beneath awareness rather than within it. The pyramids have fully merged into this background rhythm, indistinguishable from the steadiness that supports thought, breath, and rest. At this depth, there is no sense of ancient versus modern, built versus natural. Stone, sky, and time feel unified. What once appeared monumental now feels inevitable, as if such forms were always meant to arise wherever patience met awareness. The builders no longer appear as figures acting in the past. They feel present only as intention, an intention so quiet it does not announce itself, an intention that trusted time enough to step aside and let endurance speak on its own. This trust echoes here, gently. There is no need to hold on to it. It does not fade when attention drifts. It remains available without insistence, much like the pyramids themselves. The mind no longer seeks meaning. It rests within it, not meaning defined or articulated, but meaning felt as coherence, as the sense that nothing essential is missing, even when nothing specific is being considered. In this coherence, effort dissolves completely. There is no longer anything to follow, no thread to track. The story has become atmosphere. It surrounds rather than guides, supports rather than directs. This atmosphere is calm, but not empty. It is filled with continuity, with the assurance that things placed carefully enough do not require constant engagement to remain real, that endurance does not depend on vigilance. The pyramids embody this assurance fully now. They do not appear as images. They are present as steadiness itself, as the knowledge that something human once aligned deeply enough with time to still be felt, even when everything else has thinned away. Here, awareness floats lightly, unburdened by the need to conclude. The idea of an ending feels unnecessary. What was meant to be carried forward already has been, without effort. The ancient world has stepped back completely, not into distance, but into integration. It no longer stands apart as subject or story. It rests within the same quiet continuity as the present moment. From this place, nothing more needs to happen. Whether sleep arrives or wakefulness remains, Both belong equally. The rhythm does not change to accommodate either, and so the journey approaches its final pause, not marked by resolution, but by ease, where stone, time, and awareness rest together, held gently by the same patient movement that has always been there, carrying everything forward without sound, without urgency, and without end. Now there is only the pause, not a pause waiting to be filled, but one that is complete in itself. The pyramids have disappeared entirely from thought, not because they are gone, but because they no longer need to be held as images, ideas, or symbols. What they offered has already settled where words cannot reach. In this final stillness, awareness feels wide and unburdened. There is no sense of arriving somewhere, no sense of finishing something, only the quiet recognition that nothing more is required. The ancient builders placed their trust in time, and time has carried that trust forward gently, without strain, into this moment. Here, endurance is no longer remarkable. It feels natural, like breath continuing without instruction, like night following day without effort. The pyramids rest within this natural order, no different from the ground beneath or the sky above. The ancient world has not vanished. It has blended. It exists now as atmosphere rather than memory, as rhythm rather than story. What once stood as monument has become silence shaped by patience. In this silence, there is no need to distinguish between history and myth, past and present, knowing and not knowing. All of these dissolve into a single continuity that does not demand explanation to remain real. If sleep comes now, let it come. If wakefulness remains, let it remain quietly. Neither interrupts the rhythm. Both are carried equally by it. The story does not end here because it never needed an ending. It was never meant to conclude. It was meant to slow, to soften, to return attention to a pace older than urgency. The pyramids, unseen and unspoken now, continue to stand somewhere beyond thought, doing what they have always done, remaining, without announcement, without demand. And beneath everything, the long, calm movement continues, time unfolding patiently, memory loosening gently, awareness resting where it no longer needs to search. Nothing more follows. Nothing is missing. The journey releases itself naturally, leaving only quiet space, steady and sufficient, where everything that needed to endure already has, carried forward without sound, without effort, and without end.